In the heart of Lagos, where glass towers rise above crowded streets and every opportunity feels like a race against time, one little girl dared to do the impossible. When her mother Amara fell ill on the very morning of her life-changing job interview, 5-year-old Zuri made a decision that would shock everyone. With her mother's resume clutched tightly in her tiny hands, she stepped into a world built for the powerful, determined to fight for a future she believed her mother deserved. What happened next would not only capture the attention of one of the city's most feared CEOs, but also change the course of their lives forever. This is a story of courage, sacrifice, and the kind of love that defies every barrier, rich and poor, strong and weak. Before we dive into this moving story, tell us where you are watching from and what time it is right now. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our community of African stories where every tale holds a lesson worth remembering. Amara Nwosu lay weakly on the narrow bed in a modest clinic in Surulere, Lagos. The white-painted walls were peeling, and the fan above her head creaked with each slow rotation. Sweat dampened her forehead, and her breaths came in shallow gasps. The fever had drained her strength, leaving her fragile body trembling beneath the thin blanket. In her trembling hands, she clutched a cheap phone pressed to her ear. Her voice quivered, but she spoke with as much clarity as she could muster. "Hello. I'm so sorry," she whispered, her throat tight with both illness and desperation. "I've been preparing for the interview, but I'm very sick. I'm in the hospital right now. Please, I truly want to come. This job means everything." On the other end of the line, a cold, detached voice replied without compassion. "Ma'am, we do not reschedule interviews. If you are not here at the appointed time, your application will be canceled. Thank you." The line went dead with a sharp click. Amara lowered the phone slowly, as though the last of her strength had been taken away. Her arm fell lifelessly to her side, her eyes fixed on the cracked ceiling above. A soft whimper escaped her lips. "Please, don't take this chance away from me," she prayed aloud, her voice fading into the quiet of the clinic room. "My daughter, she deserves a better life." In the corner of the room, seated on a plastic chair too big for her tiny frame, Zuri watched everything. Just 5 years old, her wide, curious eyes carried the quiet wisdom of a child who had seen her mother fight too many battles. She sat still, her small hands folded neatly in her lap, her curly hair tied with bright beads that clinked softly each time she moved her head. Zuri had no words, but she understood. She understood her mother's pain, her tears, her dreams. The night passed slowly. The clinic echoed with the distant sounds of patients coughing, nurses' footsteps, and the steady drip of IVs. Zuri barely slept, her gaze fixed on her mother's restless figure. The first gray light of dawn crept through the cracked window, painting the room in muted shades. Amara's face looked pale and drawn, her lips dry, her body shivering under the thin blanket. She stirred but did not wake. The IV bag beside her clicked rhythmically, like the beat of a slow, distant drum. Zuri slid off her chair quietly, her bare feet making no sound against the tiled floor. She tiptoed to the bedside, stretching up on her toes to reach her mother's forehead. With a tender hand, she brushed back a strand of damp hair. "Mama," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You need to rest now." Her gaze shifted to the brown leather bag lying on the floor beside the bed. That bag, Amara's most prized possession, never left her sight. Inside it was her life papers, notes, and most importantly, the folder that held her resume. Zuri bent down, careful not to wake her mother, and gently unzipped the bag. Her tiny hands pulled out the clear folder, the pages inside crisp and neatly arranged. She held it against her chest as though it were a treasure chest filled with hope. On a small plastic stool in the corner lay Zuri's clothes. From the folded pile, she picked her favorite dress, a bright cottege her mother had sewn for her birthday. The fabric burst with color, pink, blue, yellow flowers woven into swirling patterns. She slipped it on carefully, tying the loose bow with trembling fingers. She then reached for her sandals, the ones worn thin but still holding together. Sliding her feet into them, she gave a small nod to herself, like a soldier preparing for duty. Zuri then pulled out a flyer she had taken from their home fridge days earlier. On it was the picture of a tall glass building gleaming under the Lagos Sunday. The name across the top read Orison Holdings. At the bottom, circled in red ink by her mother's careful hand, were 2 words and a number. Bus 24. Clutching the folder tightly, Zuri walked toward the door. She paused for a moment, her small body framed in the doorway, her eyes lingering on her mother's fragile figure resting on the bed. "I'll help you, Mama," she whispered. Then, with quiet determination, she stepped out into the bustling morning streets of Lagos. The city greeted her with chaos. Horns blared from Danfo, swerving through traffic. Vendors shouted the prices of roasted corn and plantains, and the air smelled of exhaust mixed with fried food. Zuri's small figure seemed almost swallowed by the noise and movement, but she stood firm at the side of the road. She glanced at the flyer again, her eyes scanning for the bus number. Minutes passed before a yellow Danfo screeched to a stop in front of her, its brakes squealing like an old drum. Painted hastily on the windshield was the number she saw at 24. Passengers pushed and shoved to climb aboard. Zuri hesitated only a moment before a kind woman with a tray of groundnuts on her lap noticed her. "Where are you going, small madam?" the woman asked with a gentle smile, steadying Zuri with one hand. Zuri hugged the folder closer to her chest. "To the big glass building," she answered softly. "My mama, she's supposed to have a job there." The woman studied her for a moment, surprised by her determination. Then she nodded slowly, her eyes warm. "Come sit near me. I'll tell you when to get down." The Danfo lurched forward with a jolt, sending passengers swaying. Zuri clung to the folder, her feet swinging above the grimy floor. Around her, the city buzzed with noise hawkers knocking on windows, music blasting from car radios, the shouts of conductors calling out stops. But in her small chest, her heart beat steady. She had a mission, and nothing would distract her. The ride seemed endless, but after nearly 40 minutes, the kind woman leaned down to whisper, "Your stop, little one. Look, there it is." Zuri climbed down carefully, her small sandals hitting the pavement. She looked up and froze. Before her stood the tallest building she had ever seen. The sunlight danced across its glass walls, reflecting the sky like a mirror. It was majestic, overwhelming, yet to Zuri it looked like hope itself. She took a deep breath, straightened her tiny shoulders, and stepped forward toward the wide revolving doors of Orison Holdings. The lobby was vast, with marble floors that gleamed under the lights and walls that stretched up endlessly. People in crisp suits moved swiftly, their heels clicking against the polished floor. Behind the reception desk sat a woman with neatly braided hair and gold earrings that glimmered. Her name tag read Ngozi. Ngozi was busy typing when she noticed the shadow of a small figure at her desk. She looked up and blinked in surprise. In front of her stood a little girl in a bright kittenage holding a folder almost half her size. "Hello, sweetheart," Ngozi said kindly, leaning forward. "Are you lost?" Zuri shook her head firmly. "No, I'm here for the interview." Ngozi frowned slightly, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Interview?" "Yes," Zuri said, standing straighter. "It's my mama's interview. She's very sick and couldn't come, but she really needs this job. So, I came instead." Ngozi's heart softened instantly, but her mind raced. This was unusual, no impossible. A child applying for a job. She was about to reply when two security guards began to approach, their expressions stern. Sensing tension, Ngozi quickly raised her hand to stop them. "It's okay," she told them calmly, then turned back to the girl. "What's your mama's name?" "Amara Nwosu," Zuri replied without hesitation. Ngozi checked her computer and indeed saw the name listed for a 9:00 a.m. interview. She hesitated, then pressed the button on her earpiece. "Please tell Mr. Adeyemi to come down." "Yes, right now." "Just tell him it's important." She looked back at Zuri, her expression softening into a smile. "You're very brave, my dear." Zuri gave a small, shy smile, in return hugging the folder tightly against her chest. And somewhere high above in the top floor office overlooking the city, CEO Kelechi Adeyemi was about to be summoned to a meeting he could never have expected. The elevator doors slid open with a low chime. From the top floor of Orison Holdings, Kelechi Adeyemi stepped into the lobby, his tall figure commanding immediate attention. At just 32, he was already a legend in Lagos's business world. Dark-skinned, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that looked like it had been sculpted on him, and with a reputation for being ruthless, Kelechi's presence sent quiet ripples through the staff. He was a man who rarely smiled, who measured time in deals and contracts, and who had little patience for anything outside profit. Yet in this moment, his footsteps slowed, because standing at the center of the marble lobby was not a seasoned professional or a desperate job seeker in wrinkled clothes. It was a child. A little girl in a colorful kitten's dress, her small hands wrapped tightly around a folder almost as wide as her chest. She turned as the elevator doors opened, her big eyes locking onto his with unexpected steadiness. "Are you the boss?" Zuri asked, her voice ringing clear against the hushed air. Kelechi raised an eyebrow, his surprise carefully hidden behind his composed mask. "I am," he answered slowly. Without hesitation, Zuri stepped forward. She held the folder out with both hands, lifting it as high as she could. "This is my mama's resume. She was supposed to come, but she's very sick, so I came instead." The entire lobby had fallen silent. Workers who had been rushing to meetings paused mid-step. The security guards watched uneasily while the receptionist Ngozi stood with her hand against her lips, her eyes soft with admiration. Kelechi studied the girl for a long moment. His first instinct was disbelief. Who had let a child into his building? This was Orison Holdings, a place of sharp minds and sharper ambition, not a playground. And yet the girl's unwavering gaze disarmed him. "Why would you do that?" he asked at last, his deep voice echoing slightly in the vast lobby. Zuri lifted her chin. Her voice, though soft, carried a strength far beyond her years. "Because Mama deserves more than pain." The words struck him like a hidden blow. For the first time that day, something in his chest shifted. He looked down at the folder, then back at the girl. Around them, no one dared to breathe. Finally, Kelechi turned to Ngozi. "Cancel my next meeting." "Sir," she began, startled. He did not repeat himself. His tone made it clear. Then he looked back at the child, his expression unreadable. "Come with me." Zuri's face lit up with a small, relieved smile. She hugged the folder to her chest and followed him through the glass doors that led deeper into Orison Holdings. The meeting room was vast, cold, and gleaming with glass walls. A long, polished table stretched across the center, surrounded by tall chairs. It was a room designed to intimidate, to remind anyone who entered that they were standing in a world where mistakes cost millions. Kelechi pulled out one of the oversized chairs and gestured for Zuri to sit. She climbed up with quiet determination, her legs dangling far above the ground. He sat across from her, placing the folder gently on the table. For a moment, silence filled the room as he studied the little girl. "So Zuri," he said, his voice softer than it had been in the lobby, "can you tell me why your mother wants this job?" Zuri placed her small hands on the table's edge. She didn't rush. She thought carefully before speaking, as though she understood the weight of the question. "Mama works all the time," she began. "She cleans other people's houses. She carries trays of food on her head to sell. She never gets to rest." Kelechi nodded slightly, listening. "She doesn't buy anything for herself," Zuri continued. "Even when her shoes are broken, she says, 'These ones are still okay,' and then she buys me new ones instead." Kelechi's eyes flicked down at her shoes. White sandals worn but carefully cleaned. His expression softened just slightly. "She used to go to school," Zuri said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "She told me she loved learning, but when she had me, she had to stop everything." Kelechi leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his gaze never leaving her face. One night, Zuri went on, her small voice, steady but fragile. "She told me she's tired of just surviving. She wants to use her brain again. She wants a job that sees who she really is." The room grew still. The glass walls reflected the child's earnest expression back at them, multiplying her presence as if the building itself was listening. Kelechi sat back, slowly silent. He had interviewed countless applicants in his career, graduates, with polished degrees, professionals, armed with empty buzzwords, people desperate for a title more than a purpose. But no resume, no speech, had ever struck him the way this child's simple truth had. After a long pause, he opened the folder. His sharp eyes scanned the neatly typed words. Amara Nwosu. University of Ibadan, full scholarship, top of her class. Marketing major, leadership roles, president of the student business club, peer mentor. A promising future abruptly cut off. The next entries told another story. House cleaner, street vendor, waitress, night shift janitor. The contrast was jarring. Kelechi traced the timeline with his finger, reading between the lines. He didn't need anyone to explain. He saw the path clearly, a brilliant young woman forced to abandon her dreams, navigating survival with whatever work she could find. He closed the folder slowly, leaning back in his chair. For the first time in years, something inside him stirred an echo of memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit. Memories of his own mother bent over a sewing machine late into the night, sacrificing everything so that he could study. He glanced at Zuri again. The determination in her eyes was the same determination he had once seen in the mirror as a boy. A knock at the door broke the silence. Ngozi stepped in cautiously. "Sir, your next meeting—" "Cancel everything for the rest of the morning," Kelechi interrupted. "Yes, sir." She cast a quick glance at Zuri, her lips curving into a small, proud smile before slipping out again. The CEO turned back to the little girl. "Your mother is very fortunate to have you." Zuri nodded. "I'm the one who's lucky. She never gives up on me." Something cracked open in Kelechi's carefully guarded exterior. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to smile just slightly, but enough to soften the cold edges of his face. Meanwhile, back at the clinic, Amara stirred weakly. Her fever had broken slightly, but exhaustion weighed on her body like chains. She reached instinctively for the folder she always kept beside her bed, only to find it gone. Panic jolted her awake. Her eyes darted around the room, searching desperately. "Zuri," she whispered hoarsely, her voice trembling. The chair where her daughter had sat all night was empty. Her heart pounded, fear gripping her chest. With shaky hands, she grabbed her phone and searched frantically through the scattered papers in her bag until she found the flyer for Orison Holdings. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the number circled in red. The line clicked. "Good morning, Orison Holdings. This is Ngozi speaking." "Please," Amara gasped, her voice urgent. "This is Amara Nwosu. I think my daughter may have come to your office today with my folder. She's only 5. Please, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." Ngozi's warm chuckle interrupted gently. "Don't worry, Miss Nwosu. Your daughter is safe." Amara's chest tightened, with relief tears spilling down her cheeks. In fact, Ngozi added softly, "She may have just earned you a second chance." Amara's lips parted, but no words came. She sat in stunned silence, unable to process what she had just heard. For the first time in months, perhaps years, hope flickered inside her weary heart. And upstairs in the cold glass walls of Orison Holdings, a powerful CEO and a determined child were about to set into motion a chain of events that would change all their lives forever. The rest of the morning at Orison Holdings moved like a quiet storm. Whispers floated through the corridors as word spread the CEO had postponed all his meetings because of a child. Employees who had never seen Kelechi Adeyemi deviate from his ironclad schedule exchanged startled glances. Some chuckled nervously, others frowned with suspicion, but all were curious. Inside the glass-walled meeting room, however, the air carried no amusement. It was thick with something else, something heavier. Kelechi sat with Zuri across from him, her small legs still swinging above the ground. For a long moment he said nothing, simply watching the little girl, measuring her with the same piercing gaze he reserved for top-level negotiations. Yet beneath his scrutiny was an unfamiliar warmth tugging at him, one he didn't know how to name. He finally spoke. "Zuri, tell me, what does your mother dream of?" Zuri tilted her head thoughtfully, her beads clicking together. "She dreams of a day when she doesn't have to run everywhere, when she can sit down and eat food without worrying about money. She dreams of an office like this one where she can use her mind, not just her hands. And," she paused, lowering her voice, "she dreams of me going to school without being sent home for fees." Kelechi's jaw tightened. He said nothing for a moment, only leaned back in his chair and looked out at the Lagos skyline through the glass wall. Tall buildings glittered in the morning sun, but in his mind he saw dusty streets and a younger version of himself clutching secondhand textbooks, praying his mother's tailoring shop earned enough to cover his exam fees. He turned back to Zuri. "And what do you dream of?" She smiled shyly. "I dream of Mama," smiling again. Something inside Kelechi cracked open at those words. For years he had buried his emotions beneath business contracts and power. Yet here a child's simple honesty unraveled him more than any rival or negotiation ever had. He stood abruptly, gathering the folder. "Wait here," he instructed gently before leaving the room. Zuri sat quietly, swinging her legs, humming a soft tune her mother often sang at night to calm her fevers. Ngozi slipped into the room moments later with a juice box and a small packet of biscuits. "You must be hungry," Ngozi said kindly, placing them in front of the girl. Zuri looked hesitant. "Mama says not to take food from strangers." Ngozi chuckled. "Wise advice. But don't worry, here at Orison, we take care of our guests." She winked, and Zuri finally accepted sipping her juice with both hands as if it were the finest meal in the world. Ngozi studied her, marveling at the courage radiating from such a tiny frame. She whispered under her breath, almost like a prayer, "Child, you are carrying your mother's destiny today." Upstairs in his private office, Kelechi laid the folder on his mahogany desk. His eyes lingered again on the resume. The achievements of Amara Nwosu before her life's sudden detour fascinated him. She had once been a star in the making. Yet fate had cornered her into years of survival, stripping away the glitter of her potential. Kelechi closed the folder slowly. He tapped his fingers against the desk, a habit he had when making difficult decisions. Something inside him urged him to act, something beyond logic, beyond policy. He reached for his phone and dialed a private number. "Inayola," he said when the voice answered. "Yes. Send a delivery to Surulere Clinic immediately. Flowers. No, not roses. Something simple. Wildflowers. And add a small gift, something a child would love. Chocolate milk. Yes. Write this on the card. To the strongest woman I've yet to meet. K.A." He ended the call and sat back staring out the window. For once, numbers and profit margins meant nothing. At the clinic hours later, Amara was still weak but restless. Her fever had eased, leaving behind exhaustion. She tried to sit up when the nurse entered with a small package. Confused, Amara watched as the nurse set it on her bedside table. "What is this?" she whispered. The nurse smiled faintly. "A delivery for you." With trembling fingers, Amara opened the package. A small bouquet of wildflowers greeted her eyes, their colors soft and vibrant against the dull room. Next to it sat a neatly wrapped box. She picked up the card, her breath catching as she read the words, "To the strongest woman I've yet to meet, K.A." Her eyes filled with tears. She opened the box and found a chilled carton of chocolate milk. She gasped, her heart clenching. It was Zuri's favorite. "Zuri," she whispered in alarm, her gaze snapping to the empty chair. Panic rushed through her chest. She grabbed her phone and dialed the number from the Orison flyer. When Ngozi answered, Amara's words tumbled out frantically. "This is Amara Nwosu. Please, my daughter Zuri. She must have come to your office with my folder. She's only 5. I'm so sorry, I didn't know." Ngozi's voice soothed her. "Don't worry, Miss Nozu. Your daughter is safe." Amara broke into sobs of relief. In fact, Ngozi added warmly, "She may have done something remarkable for you today. Mr. Adeyemi wants you to come for another chance. A proper interview. As soon as you are well enough." Amara pressed the phone to her chest, overwhelmed. For the first time in years, hope didn't feel like a cruel trick. Back at Orison, Kelechi returned to the meeting room. Zuri looked up from her juice box, her eyes bright. "Did I do good?" she asked softly. Kelechi crouched down to her level, something he had never done for any adult in his empire. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You did more than good. You may have changed your mother's life." Zuri smiled, her eyes sparkling with pride. For a fleeting second, Kelechi's hardened exterior softened. He saw not just a child, but a symbol of resilience, of courage, of the sacrifices mothers made in silence. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Kelechi sat alone in his office. Papers lay forgotten on his desk. Instead, he found himself staring at the sketch Zuri had made on a scrap paper Ngozi had given her before leaving. It was a child's drawing, crooked, colorful, and simple. It showed 3 figures, a woman with a bright smile, a little girl holding her hand, and a tall man standing beside them, a crown scribbled on his head. Above them in uneven letters, Zuri had written, "Mama, me and the boss." Kelechi chuckled softly, the sound foreign to his own ears. For the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him, not ambition, not pride, but something gentler, something like belonging. And deep down, though he didn't admit it yet, he knew this was only the beginning. The next morning broke with a pale Lagos sun, its golden light filtering through the blinds of the clinic window. Amara stirred awake, her body still weak, but lighter than it had been the day before. On the small bedside table lay the bouquet of wildflowers now resting in a glass jar borrowed from the nurse's station, and the empty carton of chocolate milk that Zuri had carefully finished the night before. The sight of them was like a dream Amara could hardly believe. A CEO, a man whose name she had only ever whispered as a distant star in the business world, had not only acknowledged her existence but sent her kindness. Her phone buzzed on the sheet. With trembling fingers, she picked it up. A message notification glowed on the screen. "Orison Holdings invites you for a formal interview. Please confirm your availability. Transportation will be arranged." Amara's breath caught. Her eyes welled with tears. She pressed the phone to her lips as though it were a sacred relic. For years, she had lived under the shadow of rejection, too poor, too unqualified, too invisible. And now, because of her daughter's courage, a door had opened. Mama Zuri's soft voice broke her reverie. The little girl was curled on the narrow bed beside her, blinking sleepily. "Yes, my heart," Amara whispered, stroking her daughter's curls. "We have been given another chance." Zuri's eyes brightened, and she wrapped her tiny arms around her mother's waist. "I told you, Mama, you just needed to rest. I carried your dream." Amara kissed her forehead, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Yes, my brave one. You carried it better than I ever could." 2 days later, Amara stood before the towering glass building of Orison Holdings. Her fever had broken, though her body still trembled from weakness. She wore her best outfit, a simple navy blouse tucked into a clean skirt, her hair brushed neatly into a bun. Her shoes, though old, gleamed with polish. Zuri held her hand firmly, her little eyes shining with pride. "Mama," she whispered, squeezing her mother's hand. "You will do great." Amara bent down, kissing her cheek. "Because of you, I am here." Inside the building, the staff greeted her with curious glances. Some smiled politely, others whispered behind cupped hands. She ignored the stares and kept her back straight, her grip on Zuri's hand steady. Ngozi met her at the front desk with a warm smile. "Miss Nozu, welcome. Mr. Adeyemi is expecting you." Her heart thudded wildly as she followed Ngozi down the hallway. Each step felt heavy with destiny. The executive office was vast, lined with bookshelves and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bustling city. Kelechi Adeyemi stood by his desk, his sharp suit immaculate as ever. But this time his expression was less severe. When he turned toward Amara, his gaze carried a quiet recognition, as though he had already seen her strength through her daughter's eyes. "Miss Nwosu," he greeted, extending a hand. "I'm glad you're feeling better." "Thank you, sir," she replied softly, her voice steady, despite the storm in her chest. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Please have a seat." Zuri perched on a small cushion in the corner, swinging her legs happily, as if this grand office was already familiar to her. Amara sat, placing the folder on her lap. She drew a breath, her heart pounding. "I've reviewed your resume," Kelechi began. "Your record at the University of Ibadan was impressive. Full scholarship, top marks, leadership roles. What happened after that?" Amara's throat tightened, but she forced herself to answer truthfully. "Life, sir. My father fell ill. There were bills. I tried to balance school and work, but when I became pregnant with Zuri, I had to stop everything. Since then, survival has been my education. I've worked as a cleaner, a vendor, a waitress. Not because I lacked ambition, but because I had a child to raise." Kelechi's eyes searched hers, unflinching. "And why should Orisun trust you now?" She leaned forward, her voice gaining strength. "Because I know what it means to fight for every chance. I know what it means to value an opportunity others take for granted. I don't need pity, I don't need charity. I need a platform to prove that my mind is as sharp as it was before life interrupted. Give me one chance, and I will not waste it." The silence that followed was heavy. Zuri looked from her mother to the CEO, her small hands clasped together as if in prayer. At last, Kelechi leaned back, a faint smile, ghosting his lips. "Your daughter gave the most powerful interview I've ever seen. Now you have given me the second." Amara blinked, her breath catching. "You will start as a junior associate," Kelechi continued. "It is not a high position, but it is a beginning. The rest will depend on you." Her eyes filled with tears, but she held them back. She stood, bowing her head slightly. "Thank you, sir. You won't regret this." Zuri clapped her hands in delight, her laughter filling the room like music. The first days at Orisun were not easy. Amara arrived early, long before the offices filled, and stayed late into the night. She absorbed every detail, every document, every presentation. She watched how the senior team carried themselves, how they spoke in meetings, how they navigated clients. When she made mistakes, and she did, she apologized, corrected them, and never repeated them. But not everyone was pleased by her presence. Whispers followed her in the corridors. "That's the woman whose daughter charmed the CEO." Some colleagues rolled their eyes, dismissing her as nothing more than a charity case. Amara ignored them. She knew the only answer was work, quiet, consistent, undeniable work. Every Friday afternoon, Zuri would join her at the office after school. The guards welcomed her warmly, the receptionist always kept a juice box ready, and soon the staff began to smile whenever they saw her bright little face. She made her own corner in Kelechi's office, a cushion by the window, a small box of crayons, and a stool just her size. She would sit quietly coloring pictures of houses, animals, and stars while her mother typed away. Sometimes she would draw Kelechi too, scribbling a crooked crown on his head and declaring him the king of papers. The first time she said it, Kelechi actually laughed, a real warm laugh that startled even himself. From that day, the nickname stuck. Yet beneath the growing warmth, challenges brewed. In one meeting, Amara presented a report on market trends. She had worked late into the night to perfect it, but midway through, a senior manager named Tomiwa interrupted with a smirk. "Interesting," he said, flipping through the pages. "But you missed a crucial data set here. Did you think we wouldn't notice?" Amara froze, her stomach dropping. She was certain she had included that data. The whispers around the table began again. Later that night, back at her desk, she discovered the truth. The original file had been tampered with, sections deleted deliberately. Someone had set her up. She stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She could confront Tomiwa, but without proof, it would be her word against his. And she could not afford to be seen as a complainer so soon into her job. So she chose silence, at least for now. Instead, she doubled her efforts, determined to let her work speak louder than sabotage. But in the quiet corner of the office, Zuri noticed her mother's weary eyes and whispered, "Mama, don't worry. the truth always comes out. Amara smiled faintly, brushing her daughter's cheek. I pray you're right, my love. What she didn't know was that Kelechi, watching from his office window that night, had also seen Tomiwa linger near her desk hours before the meeting, and in his sharp mind, pieces of a puzzle were already forming. The tides of fate were shifting again, and the storm was only beginning. The weeks that followed were some of the most grueling of Amara's life. Each morning she woke before dawn, dressed quietly in the dim light, and made sure Zuri was ready for school. Then she hurried through the buzzing streets of Lagos to reach Orison Holdings, before most of her colleagues had even left their homes. The whispers about her had not disappeared. If anything, they had grown sharper. She's only here because her daughter charmed the CEO, one coworker murmured as she passed. Charity case, another muttered under their breath. But Amara learned to let the words wash over her. She had survived worse hunger, illness, rejection. Words could not break her. She focused on her work, on proving herself, on building something solid where there had once been only struggle. At night, she stayed long after the others left, poring over spreadsheets, drafting proposals, taking notes from past campaigns. She knew she was not the most polished associate, but she would be the most prepared. And it was in those quiet hours that small signs of kindness appeared. One evening, while she worked alone in the dim glow of her desk lamp, she found a sandwich neatly wrapped in paper waiting for her. No note, but she knew. Another time, when Zuri had a fever and she called in late, her phone buzzed with a short message from Kelechi Family First. Take your time. He never hovered, never made a display of his support. But in those quiet gestures, Amara felt a strength beside her she had not known in years. Every Friday afternoon, Zuri became a familiar presence in the office. She arrived with her small backpack, crayons, and a smile bright enough to soften even the hardest faces. The security guards waved her in like she was royalty. The receptionist kept her favorite juice box chilled, and soon the entire staff began to call her little CEO. She had her special spot in Kelechi's office, a cushion near the window, a box of crayons, and a stool just her size. There she would draw while her mother worked. Sometimes she hummed softly. Other times she broke into giggles when she added funny crowns or wings to her sketches of the King of Papers. Kelechi often glanced up from his phone calls or documents just to watch her. He never said much, but something in his gaze softened every time Zuri handed him a crooked picture. One day she drew him holding hands with her, and Amara, a sun shining brightly above them. She labeled it in shaky letters, family. Kelechi kept that one in the top drawer of his desk. But beneath the surface of this fragile new beginning, storms brewed. Tomiwa, the senior manager who had sabotaged Amara's report, watched her progress with growing resentment. To him, her very presence was an insult. He had clawed his way up the corporate ladder with sharp elbows and sharper words. The idea that a woman with no recent experience brought in through what he called sympathy could outshine him was intolerable. So he laid his plans carefully. It began with subtle exclusions. He forgot to include Amara in meeting invites. He misplaced important documents on her desk, and when she did catch up, he made sly remarks in front of others. Maybe the janitorial staff should help with that section. She must know more about cleaning than marketing. Laughter followed, but not everyone joined in. Some grew uncomfortable, sensing cruelty behind his jokes. Still, Amara said nothing. She worked harder. She prayed for patience. One Monday morning, chaos erupted. A well-known social media influencer posted a scathing video accusing Orison Holdings of being out of touch with everyday Nigerians. She claimed the company profited from the struggles of informal workers while offering them nothing in return. Within hours, the video went viral, hashtags trending across platforms. The board demanded an immediate response. At the emergency meeting, Kelechi's sharp gaze scanned the room. We need a strategy. Now. Tomiwa smirked. Well, perhaps our junior associate would like to weigh in. She must know plenty about being on the streets. The words stung, but Amara lifted her chin. Yes, I do know. The room quieted. She stood, her voice steady, but passionate. The influencer is right about one thing. Too many companies ignore the voices of ordinary people. But Orison can turn this into an opportunity. We can launch a campaign that doesn't just market to them, but uplifts them. A project that highlights parents, especially single mothers working in the informal sector, showing how their resilience powers this economy. We can call it Small Hands, Big Futures. Murmurs rippled through the room. Kelechi leaned forward, intrigued. Amara went on, her voice gaining strength. We can partner with local markets like Balogun. We can tell authentic stories, use real faces, not staged models. In Yoruba culture, there is a saying, Omo eni enlaso mi, human beings are my clothing. It means our dignity comes from each other. If Orosun embraces this, not only will we rebuild trust, but will lead with integrity. The room fell silent. Even Tomiwa's smirk faltered. Kelechi's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Prepare a draft plan by tomorrow, he said. His voice was calm, but his gaze lingered on Amara, a flicker of something pride, respect passing across his face. That night, Amara worked until midnight. Zuri lay curled on her cushion coloring until sleep claimed her. As Amara typed the final notes of the campaign draft, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving, she was contributing, shaping something meaningful. But the next morning, disaster struck. When Amara opened the shared drive to present her draft, the document was corrupted. Whole sections had been replaced with gibberish text. The data she had compiled from market surveys was missing. Panic surged through her chest. Tomiwa's voice rang out. Unprepared again, some people simply don't belong here. Heat rose to her face, shame burning her throat. She wanted to protest, to scream the truth, but the eyes of the boardroom bore down on her. She lowered her gaze, clutching the edges of her folder. Yet Kelechi did not dismiss her. He studied her with the same piercing eyes that had once sized up Zuri in the lobby. He said nothing then, but later in the privacy of his office, he called his IT team. Within hours, the truth surfaced. The file had been deliberately altered, traces of Tomiwa's login glaring from the audit trail. Kelechi leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. He had suspected Tomiwa before, but now he had proof. The question was not if he would act, but when. Meanwhile, Amara sat at her desk, staring blankly at her notes, fighting tears. Zuri tugged at her sleeve. Mama, she whispered, her big eyes full of quiet faith. Don't worry, the truth always comes out. Amara forced a smile, brushing her daughter's cheek. I pray you're right, my love. But deep inside, she feared the weight of injustice would crush her before the truth could shine. What she didn't know was that Kelechi was already preparing to turn the tide, not just for her, but for the company and for himself. Because sometimes, the greatest storms reveal the strongest anchors. The boardroom of Orosun Holdings was silent, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Screens on the wall displayed graphs and charts, while executives shifted uneasily in their seats. The viral video accusing the company of being out of touch still dominated headlines, and investors were growing restless. At the head of the long glass table, Kelechi Adeyemi leaned forward, his fingers steepled under his chin. His eyes moved slowly across his senior staff, finally settling on Amara. She sat 2 seats away, a simple notebook in front of her, her hands folded tightly on her lap. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room. She was the outsider here, the one who didn't belong, the woman they whispered about in corridors. Yet she held her chin high, reminding herself of Zuri's words. Mama, the truth always comes out. Miss Nwosu Kelechi said at last, his voice measured but firm. I understand you proposed a campaign idea yesterday. I'd like you to present it to the board. Her heart pounded. She rose slowly, her palms damp with sweat, and carried her notes to the front. Clearing her throat, she began. Orosun Holdings is seen as a giant that cares only for glass towers and profits, she said, her voice trembling at first, then gaining strength. But Nigeria's heart beats in its people, its mothers, its street vendors, its market women. If we want to change perception, we must honor those voices. We must show the world that Orosun doesn't only speak to the powerful, it listens to the struggling too. She clicked to the first slide. Photos filled the screen, women balancing trays of food, children carrying schoolbooks, hawkers weaving through traffic with goods in hand. This campaign, Small Hands, Big Futures, will spotlight real families. We'll partner with markets like Balogun and communities like Surulere. We'll tell stories of resilience, and we'll show how Orosun invests back into those stories, not with empty slogans, but with scholarships, training, and microgrants. Our message will be simple. We see you, we believe in you, we rise together. The room was utterly still. Even those who had whispered against her leaned forward slightly. Then Tomiwa broke the silence. His voice dripped with mockery. A charity campaign? Are we running an NGO now? We deal in billions, not banana bread. This is soft, sentimental nonsense. A few executives chuckled nervously, eager to side with power. Amara steadied herself. She met Tomiwa's eyes, her voice sharper now. This isn't charity, it's strategy. When people trust a brand, they invest in it. They defend it. They carry it into places advertising can't reach. The most powerful marketing is not what you say about yourself, it's what others say about you. If we want Orison to endure, we must become a brand people believe in, not fear. Kelechi's lips curved into the faintest smile. He tapped the table once decisively. Prepare the full campaign. You'll have 1 week. Amara's chest tightened with relief. She bowed her head slightly. Yes, sir. The meeting adjourned. But as she gathered her papers, she caught Tomiwa's glare from across the room. His eyes were cold, calculating. And in that moment, she knew the storm was far from over. That night, Amara returned home to their small apartment with Zuri at her side. The neighborhood buzzed with life, children chasing each other in the dusty courtyard, women frying akara on roadside grills, men clustered around radios arguing about politics. To outsiders, it was chaos. To Amara, it was home. Inside, she collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion washing over her. Zuri climbed beside her, clutching a piece of paper. Look, Mama, she said proudly, holding up a drawing. It showed Amara standing in front of a tall glass building with a glowing sun above it. That's you at Orison, and the sun means God is watching. Amara pulled her close, tears stinging her eyes. My brave girl, you always see light where I see only shadows. The week was relentless. Amara worked tirelessly on the campaign, gathering stories, reaching out to local vendors, even convincing a group of women in Balagun Market to allow photos and interviews. She spoke to them not as a polished executive, but as one of their own. They welcomed her with open arms, offering their voices to the cause. Meanwhile, Tomiwa grew more desperate. He attended her meetings only to interrupt, whispered to colleagues that she was overreaching, and hinted that Kelechi's favoritism was clouding his judgment. But Kelechi remained silent, watching, letting the truth reveal itself. The day of the presentation arrived. The boardroom was filled not only with executives, but also with a few invited investors. Amara stood at the front, her heart pounding, while Zuri waited quietly in the reception area with Ngozi. The first slide appeared a video clip of a mother in Balagun Market, balancing a heavy tray on her head, speaking in Yoruba about her dreams for her children. Subtitles translated her words, "We don't want handouts. We want chances. With a little help, our children can build futures brighter than ours." The room grew quiet. Slide after slide revealed more. A boy selling bottled water at a traffic stop, a widow sewing clothes late into the night, children studying under a streetlight. Each story was raw, unpolished, yet deeply moving. When the final slide appeared, Zuri's drawing of the sun over Orison Holdings, the room erupted into applause. Investors nodded, impressed. One of them, a gray-haired man, leaned forward. This is brilliant. It's not only good marketing, it's legacy. Amara's knees nearly buckled with relief. But Tomiwa wasn't finished. He stood abruptly. Sir, with all due respect, this is manipulative theatrics. And let's not forget, Miss Nwosu has already shown a history of incompetence. Her last report was missing critical data. We cannot risk our brand on someone untested. Murmurs rippled through the room. Amara's throat tightened. Her face burned. But then Kelechi spoke, his voice cool, cutting through the tension like a blade. That report was tampered with. And the IT audit revealed whose login was used. Gasps filled the room. Tomiwa's face paled. Kelechi's eyes locked onto him, sharp as steel. Integrity is the foundation of Orison. You, Tomiwa, have none. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your position. The room erupted again, this time in shocked whispers. Tomiwa sputtered, but security was already at the door. Amara stood frozen, her heart racing. Relief, fear, and disbelief clashed within her. Kelechi's gaze softened as he turned to her. Miss Nwosu, your proposal will move forward. Prepare to lead the pilot phase. Her lips parted, but no words came. She bowed her head, fighting back tears. Thank you, sir. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted Lagos in hues of orange and gold, Amara sat in the quiet of her small kitchen with Zuri. She stirred a pot of soup, her hands trembling, not from weakness, but from overwhelming gratitude. Mama, Zuri asked, chewing a piece of bread. Did you win today? Amara smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. I think we did, my love. But it wasn't me alone. It was you too. You carried me into that building when I could not walk. Zuri giggled, wrapping her arms around her mother's waist. Then we're a team. Yes, Amara whispered, pressing her forehead against her daughter's. We are a team. And somewhere across town in his penthouse office, Kelechi stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker alive. He thought of the little girl with the crayons and the woman with the steady voice. For years he had believed business was about numbers, power, dominance. But tonight, for the first time, he wondered if perhaps it was also about people, about the courage of small hands and the strength of unseen hearts. and he knew deep in his chest that his life had already begun to change. The following weeks brought both light and shadows into Amara's new life at Orison Holdings. On the surface, the company buzzed with renewed energy. The Small Hands Big Futures campaign gained traction across Lagos. Billboards went up, showing images of real market women smiling proudly, holding their children close. Social media filled with hashtags praising Orison's bold decision to highlight ordinary Nigerians as the true backbone of the nation. Investors who had once doubted now sent congratulatory messages. But inside the office, the atmosphere was not all applause. Amara had proven herself, yes, but whispers still followed her like stubborn shadows. "She's just lucky," some muttered. Without the CEO's sympathy, she wouldn't last a week. Others whispered about the way Kelechi looked at her, as if every glance was evidence of favoritism. Amara heard it all, but she refused to let bitterness settle in her heart. She had a job to do, a daughter to raise, and a reputation to build. She worked with discipline, arriving earlier than everyone else, leaving after the lights in most offices had gone dark. Zuri, meanwhile, had become something of a legend in the building. Every Friday, she skipped into the lobby with her small backpack, her beads clicking in her hair. The guards greeted her with playful salutes, the receptionist always had her juice box ready, and employees who had once frowned at her now smiled when she waved. Inside Kelechi's office, she had her corner arranged with care, her cushion by the window, her crayons neatly in a box, and a small stool. Sometimes she drew pictures of her mother standing tall in front of the Orison logo. Other times she scribbled crowns and stars over Kelechi's head, calling him Baba Papers. The first time she slipped and called him that, the entire office froze. Kelechi had been on a call with a client. He covered the receiver, glanced at Zuri, and to everyone's astonishment, actually chuckled. It was a sound no one in the company had heard in years. The story spread quickly, the CEO had laughed, and it was because of the little girl. But not everyone was pleased by the warmth growing between Amara Zuri and the CEO. Whispers of favoritism turned into gossip, and gossip into resentment. Some believed Amara was climbing faster than she deserved. Others, like Tomiwa's old allies, openly looked for ways to discredit her. One afternoon, Amara found herself in the pantry pouring hot water for tea when two colleagues entered behind her. They didn't notice she was there. "She's clever," one said, "but clever doesn't mean qualified." "Exactly," the other replied. "Without her daughter's stunt, she'd still be cleaning floors. Let's see how long she lasts before she makes another mistake." Amara's hands trembled, nearly spilling the water. She swallowed hard, forcing herself not to respond. She walked out quietly, her dignity intact, but their words echoed in her chest. That night, as she tucked Zuri into bed, she whispered to herself, "I must keep proving them wrong, every day, for her, for us." The storm finally broke during preparations for the campaign's official launch. Orison Holdings was set to host a press event unveiling Small Hands Big Futures to the media. Amara was put in charge of final logistics, a huge responsibility for someone in her position. Days before the event, a crucial shipment of printed materials went missing. Posters, brochures, banners, everything needed to set up the venue had simply vanished. The vendor insisted they had delivered them. The storage team swore they had never received them. Panic rippled through the office. The launch was in 72 hours, and without the materials, the campaign could collapse in embarrassment. Amara immediately began investigating. She traced phone calls, reviewed emails, and even went down to the delivery docks herself. After hours of work, she found the truth. The delivery had indeed arrived, but someone had signed it under her name and rerouted it. Her blood ran cold. It was sabotage. Again. The culprit wasn't immediately clear, but she recognized the tactic. Tomiwa was gone, but his allies remained. Someone was determined to see her fail. Amara sat at her desk, her hands trembling. If she reported it without evidence, she'd be accused of paranoia. If she stayed silent, the launch would fail. She bowed her head and prayed silently for strength. "Need help?" a voice asked. She looked up. Kelechi stood at her door, his expression unreadable, but his eyes sharp. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I noticed your emails," he said quietly. "The missing shipment. Tell me what you know." Amara hesitated, then confessed everything. Her suspicion of sabotage, the falsified signature, her fear of being blamed again. Kelechi listened in silence, then nodded. "You were right to tell me." He pulled out his phone. "I'll handle this." The next morning, security footage revealed the truth. A junior manager loyal to Tomiwa had signed for the shipment and rerouted it to a warehouse. The materials were recovered, the saboteur dismissed on the spot. When the news spread, many in the office looked at Amara differently. Some with newfound respect, others with even deeper resentment. But for the first time she felt something shift. Her work was no longer just tolerated, it was beginning to be recognized. The day of the launch arrived. The venue was alive with lights, cameras, and a sea of journalists. On stage, giant banners of smiling women and children flanked the Orison logo. Executives bustled nervously, but Amara remained calm, her heart steady. Backstage, Zuri clung to her hand. "Mama, you're going to be amazing." Amara kissed her forehead. "This is for us, my love. For every mother like me. For every child like you." When she stepped on stage to introduce the campaign, her voice rang clear. She spoke of resilience, of dignity, of futures built by hands both small and large. She quoted Yoruba proverbs, "Weaving culture into commerce, Omo Ani and Lasomi people are my covering." She reminded the audience that strength is not measured only by wealth, but by the sacrifices made quietly every day by millions of unsung heroes. The applause was thunderous, cameras flashed, social media lit up instantly with praise. In the front row, Kelechi watched her with a strange tightness in his chest. Pride, yes, admiration, yes, but also something deeper, something dangerous, a pull he could not ignore. When Amara stepped off stage, she was met by Zuri's arms wrapping around her waist and a chorus of congratulations from colleagues who had once doubted her. Yet, even in the joy of the moment, Amara felt the weight of the journey still ahead. Success was never final. Challenges would come again. But tonight, for the first time in years, she felt something solid beneath her feet, not just survival, but possibility. Later that evening, after the crowd had gone and the lights were dimmed, Amara found herself alone in the empty hall, packing up stray folders. She heard footsteps and turned. Kelechi stood in the doorway, his hands in his pockets. "You did well," he said simply. "Thank you, sir." She hesitated, then added, "But it wasn't just me, it was Zuri. She is the reason I stand here." Kelechi's gaze softened. "And you are the reason she dreams so big." For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Amara lowered her eyes, her heart racing. She could not afford distractions, not now. But in that silence, something passed between them, something both terrifying and undeniable. Then Zuri's laughter echoed from the corner, breaking the tension. She ran toward them, holding a crayon drawing of the three of them together under a shining Sunday. "Look, Mama, look, Uncle Kelechi, we're a family." Amara froze her breath, caught in her throat. Kelechi blinked, visibly shaken. And yet when he crouched down to Zuri's level and placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his voice was soft. "It would be my honor." And with those words, the ground beneath all of them shifted forever. The revelation of Kelechi's quiet words, "It would be my honor," echoed in Amara's mind long after that night at the campaign launch. She tried to convince herself it had been a momentary slip, an indulgence of kindness toward Zuri. Yet every time she looked into his eyes afterward, she saw something different. No longer just the cold CEO, no longer just the man who had given her a second chance, but someone who carried a hidden softness. It both terrified and comforted her. Life at Orison Holdings moved forward quickly. The Small Hands Big Futures campaign exploded across Nigeria. Newspapers praised it as authentic and groundbreaking. Social media buzzed with stories of mothers and vendors who felt seen for the first time. Sales climbed, investors smiled. And for the first time in years, Amara walked into the office with her head held high, her work spoken of, not as charity but as brilliance. But storms always follow the Sunday. It began with murmurs from the public. One influencer accused the campaign of being a publicity stunt. Another claimed Orison was exploiting poverty to make profits. Soon, rival companies fueled the fire, suggesting that the campaign was manipulative marketing. The media frenzy grew. A single viral tweet declared Orison Holdings uses poor people as props while paying their staff peanuts. Inside the office, the atmosphere shifted. Panic crept into conversations. Investors began calling again, worried about brand damage. The board demanded answers. In an emergency meeting, tension buzzed like static in the air. Executives threw around words like crisis management and damage control. Some suggested shutting the campaign down entirely. Amara sat in silence for most of the meeting, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Finally, when Kelechi asked for opinions, she spoke up. "Shutting it down proves them right," she said firmly. Her voice was calm, but her heart pounded. "We cannot erase the voices we promised to amplify. Instead, we must double down. Go to the markets, the schools, the streets. Invite critics to see the work firsthand. Let transparency be our answer." Some scoffed. Naive one board member muttered, but Kelechi's eyes fixed on her thoughtful. And how do you propose we do that? Amara took a deep breath. Host community forums. Let people speak directly to Orison. Record their feedback. Show that we are not above listening. We don't just tell their stories, we let them tell their own. Silence filled the room. Then slowly Kelechi nodded. Prepare the plan. That night, exhaustion weighed heavy on Amara's body. She sat at her desk long after everyone else had gone piecing together the logistics of community outreach. The hum of Lagos nightlife filtered through the windows, traffic horns, street vendors, music drifting from bars. Zuri sat curled in the corner with her crayons humming softly to herself. At some point, she slipped onto Kelechi's leather couch and fell asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Kelechi entered quietly, removing his tie, loosening the weight of the day. He paused at the sight of Zuri, sleeping a soft smile tugging at his lips. Then he turned to Amara. You carry too much, he said simply. Amara didn't look up. Carrying is all I've ever known. There was no pity in his voice when he replied, only understanding. Then let someone share the load. Her hands froze on the keyboard. She looked up at him, startled. For a long moment, their eyes locked. The room felt suddenly smaller, filled with unspoken words. She wanted to tell him that she couldn't, that her life was already too complicated, that love was not something she could risk. But the words stuck in her throat. Zuri stirred in her sleep, mumbling, Baba! The word cracked the silence. Kelechi inhaled sharply, then exhaled, as though surrendering to something inevitable. Good night, Amara, he said quietly before leaving the room. Amara sat frozen, her heart racing. She knew something had shifted again. Days later, the first community forum took place at Balogun Market. A large tent was set up filled with chairs and a simple stage. Vendors, mothers, students, and journalists gathered in the heat of the afternoon. Amara stood before the crowd, her palms damp, her voice steady. Orison Holdings is not here to speak at you, she said. We are here to listen. Hands shot up. Questions poured in. Some were angry, accusing the company of hypocrisy. Others were cautious but hopeful. Amara answered each one honestly, sometimes admitting what Orison had failed to do, sometimes promising changes. Kelechi sat at the edge of the stage, watching silently. For the first time, the CEO of Orison Holdings was not the center of attention. Amara was, and she carried it with grace. By the end of the day, something remarkable happened. The anger in the crowd softened. Vendors clapped. Mothers thanked her. Journalists tweeted live updates. Orison listens. First time a big company sits with the people. The tide began to turn. But trouble was not finished. That night, as Amara returned to her small apartment, she found an anonymous letter slipped under her door. The handwriting was messy. The ink smudged. You are being used. Don't mistake kindness for love. When they are done, you will be discarded. Her heart pounded as she read the words again and again. Fear coiled in her stomach. Who had written this? A bitter colleague, a jealous rival. She tore the paper in half and threw it into the bin. But the words lodged in her chest like thorns. Later, as she tucked Zuri into bed, the little girl looked at her with wide eyes. Mama, why are you sad? Amara forced a smile. I'm not sad, my heart, just tired. But when Zuri fell asleep, Amara sat in the dark, staring at the wildflowers Kelechi had once sent her. She whispered into the silence, Am I strong enough for this? The next morning, she walked into Orison with her shoulders squared. The whispers grew louder, the stares sharper, but she ignored them all. She had survived storms before. This one would not break her. That afternoon, during a quiet break, Zuri marched confidently into Kelechi's office and placed another crayon drawing on his desk. This time it was 3 figures standing under a tree holding hands. Above them she had written in big crooked letters, Family is forever. Kelechi stared at the picture for a long time, his throat tight. When he finally looked up, Amara was standing at the door watching. Their eyes met, and for once neither looked away. As the year-end gala approached, anticipation filled the office. Orison planned to celebrate the success of the campaign, the resilience of its staff, and the future of the company. For Amara, it felt like the beginning of something new, and yet the letter's warning still echoed in her mind. Would this journey end in triumph or heartbreak? For now, she could not know. All she could do was walk forward with Zuri's small hand clasped in hers, and faith that light would continue to break through the shadows. Because in Lagos, as in life, storms always gave way to sunrise. The ballroom of Eco Hotel glowed that December evening, chandeliers scattering golden light across polished marble floors. The Orison Holdings year-end gala was always a spectacle, but this year the air carried a sharper anticipation. Everyone knew the Small Hands Big Futures campaign had changed the company's fortunes, and everyone wanted to see who would be recognized for it. Amara stood near the back of the hall with Zuri's hand in hers. Her daughter twirled excitedly in a cream dress with silver shoes, the beads in her hair clicking with every spin. Amara herself wore a simple emerald green gown, borrowed from a friend at church, its flowing fabric, making her appear taller, more radiant. Still, her heart pounded. She had never stood in such a room among politicians, tycoons, and celebrities. The whispers had already started. Isn't that her? The junior associate who became the CEO's pet project. She doesn't belong here. Wait until the novelty fades. Amara tightened her grip on Zuri's hand, whispering, "Chin up, my love. We walk with dignity." On the other side of the hall, Kelechi Adeyemi moved through the crowd with his usual air of quiet command. Dressed in a midnight blue suit, his expression was composed, but his eyes, when they found Amara, softened in a way that did not go unnoticed. Whispers grew louder. The program began with speeches from board members. Numbers were celebrated, contracts mentioned, profits applauded. But the highlight of the evening was yet to come, Kelechi's keynote. When his name was announced, the crowd hushed. He stepped to the podium, his tall frame illuminated by the chandeliers. For a moment he said nothing, scanning the room with the same sharp gaze that once made even seasoned executives tremble. Then his voice rang out, calm but powerful. "Every year I stand here and speak of growth, expansion, and profit margins. But tonight I want to tell a different kind of story." Murmurs rippled. This was not what they expected. Kelechi continued. "Some months ago, a little girl walked into this very building carrying a folder almost bigger than herself. She said she had come for her mother's interview. Her words were simple, but they carried more truth than any resume I have ever read. Because Mama deserves more than pain." Gasps fluttered across the hall. People turned to glance at Amara and Zuri. Amara's cheeks burned, but she held her head high. "That little girl, Kelechi," went on, his voice steady, "reminded me of why we build companies at all, not just to chase numbers, but to create opportunities." Her mother, Miss Amara Nwosu, proved that resilience and dignity can shine even in the darkest moments. And because of them, Orison found not only a campaign, but a heartbeat. The hall erupted in applause. Some stood clapping with genuine respect. Others clapped slowly, reluctantly, but they clapped all the same. Kelechi lifted his glass. "To the small hands that carried a dream, and to the futures that begin when we dare to believe." All eyes turned to Amara and Zuri. Zuri giggled and waved proudly, while Amara's eyes filled with tears she could not hold back. For once the whispers around her were drowned in thunderous applause. Later that night, after the speeches ended and the music began, Amara found herself standing alone by the Christmas tree in the corner of the ballroom. Its lights glowed softly, casting a halo around her emerald dress. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath. "Beautiful." A deep voice said quietly beside her. She opened her eyes. Kelechi stood there holding 2 glasses of juice, one for her, one for Zuri. His smile was faint but real. "You didn't have to speak of me," she whispered. "I did," he replied. "The truth deserved to be told." She shook her head. "Now they'll say even more. That I'm here because of you, not because of my work." "Let them talk," Kelechi said simply. "Your work speaks louder." Amara looked at him, her chest tightening. "And if they're right, if this is all just pity," his eyes softened. "Do you think pity builds campaigns that shift nations? Do you think pity makes me cancel meetings or listen when I have never listened before? No, Amara, this is respect, and perhaps more." Her breath caught. She wanted to respond, but words failed her. At that moment, Zuri ran up her cheeks, flushed from dancing with the security guards. She tugged Kelechi's sleeve. "Uncle Kelechi, can I tell you something?" He crouched down. "Anything." Zuri's eyes were wide serious. "Mama smiles more when you're around. I think maybe you should be Baba for real." The ballroom seemed to freeze around them. Amara's heart stopped. She tried to hush her daughter, but Kelechi only smiled softly, his hand resting gently on Zuri's shoulder. "It would be my honor," he said again, his voice low but certain. Amara's throat tightened. Tears pricked her eyes, but this time they weren't born of fear or exhaustion. They were born of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years' hope. In the weeks after the gala, life at Orison changed again. Amara's role was no longer that of an overlooked junior associate. She was invited into strategy meetings, her opinions sought and valued. When colleagues whispered now, some did so with admiration, others with envy, but no one doubted her competence. She grew into her position with quiet power, mentoring new hires, offering insights drawn not from textbooks but from lived struggle. And Zuri continued to be the heart of it all, skipping through the office with her drawings, handing out stickers to executives, reminding even the sternest managers to eat their lunch. For Kelechi, the change was even subtler. The man once known for his cold detachment found himself pausing in hallways to greet staff taking interest in stories beyond spreadsheets. He never admitted it aloud, but everyone knew the little girl and her mother had softened the edges of the stone-hearted CEO. One Friday evening, as the sun set over Lagos, Amara stayed late to finish a report. Zuri hummed softly in the corner, coloring stars on a piece of paper. Kelechi stood by the window, the city lights flickering in his reflection. "You've changed the company," he said suddenly. Amara looked up. "No, I only reminded it of what it should have been all along." He turned his gaze steady. "And you've changed me." The words hung in the air. Amara's heart raced. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, two people bound by a journey neither had expected. Then Zuri skipped over, holding her drawing. "Look, it's us three under the Sunday. And I wrote family this time." Kelechi took the paper, his fingers brushing Amara's as he did. He smiled. "Perfect." Amara's eyes filled with tears again. She realized something profound. This wasn't just about a job or even survival anymore. It was about the possibility of healing, of love, of belonging. In a city of closed doors and unforgiving streets, a little girl had carried a folder bigger than herself and opened not just an office, but a future. And as Lagos lights sparkled outside the glass tower, Amara whispered silently in her heart, "Sometimes the bravest feet wear the smallest shoes." The new year dawned bright over Lagos, the Harmattan haze lifting slowly from the streets, leaving behind crisp air and golden light. At Orison Holdings, the success of Small Hands Big Futures had set a new standard for the company. Amara, once the outsider with trembling hands and a battered resume, now walked through the glass doors each morning with a quiet authority. She was no longer introduced as the woman with the child, but as associate strategist, one of the minds behind the campaign that had redefined the company's image. Still, she never forgot where she came from. She arrived early, stayed late, took notes diligently, and listened more than she spoke. Some colleagues respected her, others watched warily, but none could deny her competence anymore. Zuri remained the light of the office. Every Friday, she skipped through the halls, the beads in her hair clinking like tiny bells. She had her spot by the window, her crayons ready, her smile warming even the sternest faces. Staff began to call her little CEO not as a joke, but as a badge of affection. She reminded everyone that business at its heart was human. And then there was Kelechi. Once known for his icy detachment, the CEO now carried himself differently. He still demanded excellence, but he had learned to pause to listen, to notice the people behind the numbers. When he spoke, his words carried weight, not only of authority but of care. His sharpness had not dulled, but it was tempered by something gentler, a transformation noticed by all. And though he never admitted it aloud, everyone knew the source of that change, the woman with quiet resilience and the child with crayons who had walked into his world. One Saturday afternoon, weeks after the gala, Kelechi invited Amara and Zuri to his family home on Victoria Island. It was not an office, not a meeting, but a step beyond the walls of business. Amara hesitated at first, fear tugging at her heart. She had been judged enough already. Stepping into his personal world felt like crossing a dangerous line. But Zuri tugged her hand with bright eyes. "Mama, please." Uncle Kelechi said, "There's a big garden. I want to see it." So she agreed. The mansion was vast, its white walls gleaming, surrounded by palm trees, swaying gently in the sea breeze. Inside, the scent of jollof rice and suya greeted them warmly. Kelechi's mother, a regal woman with kind eyes, welcomed Amara with open arms. "So this is the woman my son cannot stop speaking about," she said with a knowing smile. Amara blushed, her heart pounding. Zuri, meanwhile, darted into the garden laughing as she chased butterflies. Kelechi watched her with a softness Amara had only glimpsed before. "She reminds me of myself," he said quietly. Not her joy, I didn't have much of that, but her courage. Walking into a place where she didn't belong, refusing to leave without being seen. Amara looked at him, her throat tight. She carried what I could not. And now, he said, his gaze steady, "You carry, both of you." For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with truth. Then Zuri's laughter rang out, breaking the tension, reminding them that love sometimes spoke loudest through the smallest voices. Months passed. The campaign flourished, Orison expanded into new markets, and Amara grew into her role with quiet power. She became known not just for her ideas, but for her integrity. Her colleagues, once skeptical, began seeking her guidance. She mentored younger staff, especially women, reminding them that dignity and brilliance could coexist with struggle. Yet through all her growth, one question lingered in her heart. Was this only professional respect, or was there something deeper between her and Kelechi? She felt it in the way his eyes lingered a second too long in the small gestures. Sandwiches left on her desk notes, reminding her to rest his unwavering defense of her work. But fear held her back. She could not risk mistaking gratitude for love, respect for pity. Then came the night everything changed. It was late, the office nearly empty. Amara sat at her desk finishing a report. Zuri, curled on her cushion, had fallen asleep with her crayons scattered around her. The city lights glowed beyond the glass windows, Lagos alive even in the midnight hour. Kelechi entered quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. He set one on her desk without a word. "Thank you," she whispered, sipping gratefully. For a while they sat in silence, the hum of the city filling the space. Then Kelechi spoke, his voice lower than usual. "Do you know why I never smiled before?" Amara looked up startled. "Why?" "Because I had nothing to smile about. My world was numbers, contracts, victories that felt hollow. Until a little girl walked into my lobby and told me her mother deserved more than pain. Until a woman sat across from me and spoke not with empty words but with truth. That is when I remembered what matters." Her chest tightened. "Kelechi." He leaned forward, his eyes unwavering. "This isn't pity, Amara. This isn't charity. It's respect, admiration, and something more. Something I haven't allowed myself to feel in years." Tears stung her eyes. She looked away, afraid of the hope blooming inside her. "People will talk. They already do." "Let them," he said firmly. "They don't know our truth. They don't know what it means to fight and to keep standing." Zuri stirred in her sleep, mumbling softly, "Baba?" Amara's tears fell, then not of pain but of release. She looked at Kelechi, her voice trembling. "If you choose us, it must be for life. We've walked too long alone to be discarded again." His answer was steady, without hesitation. "Then for life it is." The months that followed were not a fairy tale, but something richer, a partnership built on respect, shared burdens and laughter that grew slowly but surely. Amara rose to a senior strategist role, respected not for her ties but for her undeniable skill. Zuri thrived in school, known as the little CEO who had once carried her mother's resume into destiny. And Kelechi, still sharp, still commanding, found peace in places he had once ignored, in a child's drawing, in shared meals, in the quiet of family. Life has a way of testing us through storms, but often the greatest victories are born not in power, but in persistence. Amara's journey reminds us that resilience and dignity can carve paths where none seem to exist, and that sometimes the smallest hands carry the heaviest dreams. Zuri's courage teaches us that love is not measured by size or strength, but by heart. And Kelechi's transformation proves that even the hardest hearts can soften when faced with truth. To everyone hearing this story, remember, opportunities may come disguised as trials, and love often enters quietly without announcement. Who in your life has carried you when you could not walk? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you believe in stories that uplift and inspire, subscribe to our channel for more African stories. Together, let's keep hope alive,